In a small, impoverished neighborhood, the streets were submerged under the relentless onslaught of days of rain. Homes that had once been humble abodes were now halfway underwater, and the murky water had turned the area into a maze of debris and wreckage. People shuffled around, trying to salvage what little remained of their belongings, while others helped carry belongings or assisted the elderly across the dangerous streets. The sky was a somber gray, and the sound of rain slapping the pavement and windows was deafening. Among the people trying to make the best of the situation was Aidan, a 12-year-old boy who, despite his own struggles, always found ways to help those around him. With his worn-out sneakers and a jacket far too big for him, Aidan moved with purpose, guiding his neighbors through the flooded streets. He was always there to lend a hand or offer words of encouragement, even if his own house had been flooded as well. Aidan had grown up in this neighborhood, and he knew that the only way to survive was to lean on each other. Suddenly, a faint, desperate cry caught Aidan's attention. His heart skipped a beat as he looked around, trying to locate the source of the sound. His eyes narrowed as he spotted a baby stroller floating precariously among the debris, its wheels half submerged in the floodwaters. Without thinking, Aidan bolted toward it, his heart racing. He could see the outline of a small baby inside the stroller, the infant's cries growing louder as the water continued to rise. The stroller was drifting dangerously close to a large pile of debris, where it could easily get stuck, tipping over, or worse, getting swept away. Aidan's legs burned with exertion as he waded through the cold, dirty water, making his way toward the stroller. His breath was shallow, his focus entirely on the baby. He reached the stroller just in time and without hesitation carefully but quickly pulled it toward him. The baby was soaked, but still alive, and Aidan let out a sigh of relief. Holding the baby close, he began to carefully make his way back to higher ground. Every step felt like it might be his last, but Aidan didn't care. He was determined to save the child and get them to safety. As he climbed up the muddy embankment and back to the safety of his neighbors, Aidan couldn't help but look down at the baby. Despite the chaos of the situation, he felt a surge of pride for doing the right thing, no matter the cost. But what Aidan didn't know was that this moment would change his life forever. Aidan's heart pounded in his chest as the floodwaters rose higher, pressing against his legs with increasing force. The current was strong, and every step felt like a battle. He could hear the distant shouts of people, but their voices were drowned out by the roar of the rushing water. The stroller, with the baby still strapped inside, was drifting dangerously toward a mass of debris, spinning as it moved. Time was running out. Without hesitation, Aidan plunged further into the chest-deep water, fighting the current as it threatened to pull him under. His eyes remained fixed on the stroller, which was now caught in a powerful swirl of water. Every inch forward felt like an eternity, but Aidan was determined. He had to save the baby. The floodwaters lapped at his waist and chest, forcing him to push harder, but he refused to stop. The baby's cries rang in his ears, the sound driving him to press on. Aidan could see the stroller beginning to tip over as the flood dragged it further away from him. His feet slipped on the slick, uneven ground, but he steadied himself, trying not to lose his footing. His fingers brushed against the stroller's handle, and with all his strength, Aidan yanked it toward him. It felt like pulling a heavy weight, but he managed to get a firm grip and hold it steady. The baby was still crying, but thankfully, it was safe inside the stroller. Just as Aidan thought he had managed to get the stroller under control, he looked up and saw a car, dislodged from its position by the rising waters, drifting toward them. It was a large, heavy vehicle, and it was moving fast, the current propelling it toward Aiden and the baby. Panic surged in Aiden's chest as he realized the danger that was fast approaching. He had to move, and fast. Aiden quickly turned the stroller to face the current and pushed it as hard as he could, the baby's cries growing louder in his ears. He was fighting against both the water and the debris, but the car was moving too quickly. It was closing the distance between them, its tires scraping against the surface of the water, inching closer to where Aiden was struggling to get the stroller to safety. The sheer weight of the car and the speed at which it was drifting toward them made Aiden's heart race. His mind raced as he desperately tried to figure out how to protect the baby and himself. There was nowhere to run, nowhere to escape to. He was stuck in the middle of the flooding chaos. The car was getting closer, and Aiden knew he couldn't dodge it. But then, just in time, he spotted a metal pole sticking out of the debris. It was a lifeline. Aiden quickly steered the stroller toward the pole and used it to push himself to the side, narrowly avoiding the car's path. The car drifted past them, scraping the water's surface with a loud screech as it continued down the flood. Aiden let out a shaky breath, his chest heaving as he finally caught his breath. He looked down at the baby, whose cries had subsided. The child was still wet, but safe for the moment. Aiden wiped the sweat from his brow, his arms aching from the effort, but his resolve was unshaken. He needed to get the baby to safety, and he wouldn't stop until he did. As he fought against the current to maneuver the stroller toward a safer area, Aiden could feel eyes on him. The community had been watching from nearby rooftops, some of them peering over the edge to get a better look at the young boy's heroic actions. Whispers of awe began to ripple through the crowd. "Look at that kid go," one of them murmured. "He's saving that baby." Aiden could barely hear the voices above the rush of the water, but he could sense the admiration from those watching. He didn't need recognition. He needed to save the baby. But it was comforting to know that the community was witnessing his efforts. It fueled his determination even further. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Aiden managed to guide the stroller up onto a slightly elevated area, where the water was shallower. He paused for a moment to catch his breath, looking down at the baby. Its cries had turned into soft whimpers, but the baby was breathing. Aiden gently reached down, unbuckling the stroller's straps and lifting the baby into his arms. The child was shaking from the cold, but alive. Aiden looked up, scanning the rooftops where the onlookers were still watching. He didn't know who they were, or if they could help, but he wasn't about to stop now. He began walking toward the nearest dry area, with the baby nestled safely in his arms, determined to find shelter for the child. As he moved, more people began to shout encouragement. Some waved from their windows, shouting their support for the young hero who had saved the baby. The sight of Aiden carrying the child through the floodwaters galvanized the community. They began to rally, helping to move the stroller and create a safe space for the baby and Aiden. The true strength of the neighborhood shone through that day, and it was all because of one boy's bravery. Aiden had just done something that many adults would have hesitated to do, risking his life to save a stranger's child. And in doing so, he not only saved a life but also reminded the world that heroes come in all shapes, sizes, and ages. As Aiden carefully carried the baby to a small dry patch of land, his heart still pounded in his chest. The floodwaters continued to surge around him, but he had managed to find some solid ground to shelter the child from the worst of the danger. He gently rocked the baby in his arms, trying to comfort it. The baby was quiet now, though it shivered from the cold. Aiden's hands trembled as he held the tiny, fragile body, his thoughts racing. He had done what he could to keep the baby safe. But now what? Just as he was about to settle down, looking around for any way to further protect the child, he heard the sound of hurried footsteps. A man and woman came rushing toward him, their faces full of concern. They were well dressed, the woman's heels clicking urgently against the wet pavement, the man's suit impeccably sharp, even in the chaos of the flood. The woman was frantic, her eyes scanning the scene as she shouted, "Where is our son?" The man's voice was equally filled with desperation as he looked around. "Our baby. Where's our baby?" Aiden stood frozen for a moment, his eyes wide with confusion, unsure of who these people were. As the couple reached him, the man's eyes landed on the child in Aiden's arms, and he breathed a sharp sigh of relief. His face softened, and he quickly rushed forward, his hands trembling as he took the baby from Aiden's arms. The woman followed closely behind, tears welling up in her eyes. You have him," the man said, his voice full of disbelief and gratitude. Thank you so much." The woman, her face pale with fear, looked at Aiden, then back at her son, who was now crying softly but appeared unharmed. She wiped her tears away, her hands shaking, as she gently stroked the baby's forehead. Where did you find him?" Aiden, his exhaustion starting to catch up with him, nodded toward the rising floodwaters. "I found him floating in a stroller in the water," he said, his voice soft but steady. I couldn't let him get swept away. I had to help." The man shook his head in disbelief, his gratitude overwhelming him. He pulled Aiden into an embrace, catching him off guard with the sudden show of affection. "You're a hero," he whispered, still clutching the baby in his arms. I didn't do it for thanks," Aiden said, pulling away from the hug but still looking at the man, the words coming out quietly but firmly. "I just did what I thought was right." The woman, now visibly composed, stepped forward and gently placed a hand on Aiden's shoulder. "You saved our son. You saved our world," she said with a small smile, her eyes glistening with tears. "How can we ever thank you?" Aiden, always humble, simply shrugged. "It's what anyone would have done," he said with a shy smile, not expecting anything in return. "I'm just glad he's okay." Mr. Mitchell, still overwhelmed with emotion, nodded vigorously. "You've given us more than we could ever imagine," he said. "We owe you everything." The couple's gratitude was palpable, and Aiden couldn't help but feel a sense of pride swelling inside him. Even though he had only been trying to help, the magnitude of the situation slowly began to sink in. He had saved the child of someone important, but to Aiden, it didn't matter. He had just done what anyone in his shoes would have done, acting out of instinct and a desire to help. "I don't need anything," Aiden said, shaking his head. "I'm just happy you're both okay. I'm just a kid. I'm not looking for any kind of reward." Mr. Mitchell raised an eyebrow and placed a hand on Aiden's shoulder. "You may not be looking for a reward, son," he said, "but what you've done deserves recognition. You didn't hesitate. You risked your life for a child you didn't even know. I can't let that go unnoticed." The woman nodded, her eyes still fixed on her son. "I agree," she said. "You're a true hero. There's nothing more valuable than what you did for us today." Aiden's mind raced, unsure of what the Mitchells meant. He didn't want anything from them. He wasn't a hero. He had just been doing the right thing. Yet, as he looked at the couple, he could see how much they valued him and what he had done. Before Aiden could protest, Mr. Mitchell pulled out his phone and made a quick call. "We need to make sure this young man is taken care of," he said. "He deserves more than just our gratitude." Aidan stood there, stunned, as Mr. Mitchell spoke to someone on the phone. He couldn't quite grasp what was happening, but the words "taken care of" hung heavily in the air. What did that mean? What could a billionaire possibly want to offer a kid like him? The Mitchells seemed determined, and Aidan had a sinking feeling that his life was about to change in a way he couldn't yet comprehend. The next morning, Mr. Mitchell, accompanied by his assistant, drove into the neighborhood where Aidan lived. The car slowed as they passed crumbling buildings and littered streets, a stark contrast to the pristine surroundings of Mr. Mitchell's world. He observed the condition of Aidan's home, more of a shack than a house, with broken windows and a door that barely hung on its hinges. The surrounding area was poor, and it was clear that Aidan's family had been struggling for a long time. Mr. Mitchell's heart sank as he looked at Aidan's mother, who stood on the porch with a weary expression. Aidan had told him that his mother worked tirelessly to make ends meet, but seeing their situation firsthand was a sobering experience. Aidan's family lived in conditions that no child should have to endure. It was clear that something had to change. Stepping out of the luxury car, Mr. Mitchell walked up to Aidan's mother and shook her hand. "I'm sorry it took me this long to see how you've been living," he said, his voice filled with genuine concern. "But today, I intend to change that." Aidan, who had been watching the scene unfold from the doorway, approached cautiously. He still didn't fully understand why Mr. Mitchell had come, but he had a feeling it was about to be something big. "Young man," Mr. Mitchell began, turning to Aidan, "you saved my son's life. For that, I will be forever grateful. But I can't just leave you here. You and your family deserve so much more than this." Aidan shifted uncomfortably, not sure where the conversation was headed. Mr. Mitchell continued, his tone serious but kind. "I want to offer you a new beginning. I'm going to arrange for your family to move into a safe, comfortable home. A place where you don't have to worry about the next meal or the next bill. And as for you, Aidan, I'm going to pay for your education. You have a bright future ahead of you, and I want to make sure you have every opportunity to pursue it." Aidan stood frozen, the weight of the words slowly sinking in. He looked at his mother, who was standing beside him, a mixture of disbelief and hope on her face. She had never imagined that anyone, let alone a billionaire, would offer them such a chance. Mr. Mitchell wasn't done yet. He turned back to Aidan's mother. "I also want to help with your employment situation. I can offer you a position in one of my companies, something that will give you financial stability, so you don't have to struggle anymore." Aidan's eyes widened. He had never imagined his life could change so drastically, so suddenly. "But I didn't do it for any reward," he said quietly. "I just helped because it was the right thing to do." Mr. Mitchell smiled kindly but firmly. "I know you didn't, and that's exactly why I'm doing this. You did something remarkable, and now it's my turn to do something for you." Aidan hesitated. He didn't feel deserving of all this kindness. His family had always managed, even in their struggle. He didn't know if it was right to accept such an offer, knowing that others were out there who needed help just as much as he did. Seeing the uncertainty in her son's eyes, Aidan's mother stepped forward, gently placing a hand on his shoulder. "Aidan, this is a blessing," she said softly. "We can't refuse an opportunity like this. You've done so much for others. It's time we allow someone to help us. You've earned this." Aidan looked from his mother to Mr. Mitchell, his mind racing. He could see the sincerity in Mr. Mitchell's eyes, and he knew deep down that this was a chance to change the course of his life. Aidan didn't have to do this alone anymore. He took a deep breath, his decision finally clear. "Thank you," Aidan said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Thank you so much." Mr. Mitchell smiled warmly, shaking Aidan's hand. "No, thank you, Aidan. You've already given me the most valuable thing anyone could offer, your courage and your heart. This is the least I can do." With that, Mr. Mitchell's assistant handed over the necessary paperwork for the new home, and Aidan's family was officially offered a fresh start, a life full of promise, opportunities, and hope. It wasn't just the house or the education that mattered. It was the chance for Aidan to become the man he always wanted to be, with the support and resources to make that dream a reality. Aidan's family moved into their new home with a mixture of awe and disbelief. The house was far more than they had ever imagined, spacious, clean, and secure, with a beautiful backyard that had a garden where Aidan and his sister could play. The weight of their struggles seemed to lift, replaced with a sense of stability and safety they had never known. Aidan's mother, overwhelmed with gratitude, could hardly believe how quickly their lives had transformed. Aidan, too, was in awe of the new world that had opened up to him. His new school was a far cry from the schools he had attended before. It was a prestigious institution with top-notch facilities, and Aidan found himself both excited and nervous. But his natural curiosity and determination drove him to excel. He threw himself into his studies with a focus that astonished his teachers. Aidan quickly became one of the top students in his class, earning praise from his teachers and respect from his peers. Throughout this transformation, Mr. Mitchell remained a constant presence in Aidan's life. He took an active interest in Aidan's education, meeting with him regularly to offer advice and guidance. Mr. Mitchell also connected Aidan with successful professionals, helping him to build valuable networks. He became Aidan's mentor, showing him that the world was full of possibilities, if only he was willing to work for them. One afternoon, while they were sitting together in the garden of Aidan's new home, Mr. Mitchell asked him about his dreams for the future. Aidan looked at the man who had given him everything and replied with quiet confidence, "I want to give back, sir. I want to help others like me, who didn't have the same chances I got. I want to make sure no one has to feel invisible or forgotten." Mr. Mitchell smiled and placed a hand on Aidan's shoulder. "I have no doubt you'll do great things, Aidan. Just remember, the journey is as important as the destination, and you're already on your way." Aidan nodded, a fire burning in his heart. He had been given a new life, one filled with hope, opportunities, and a sense of purpose. He knew that one day he would return to his community to make a difference, just as Mr. Mitchell had done for him. Years later, Aidan stood in front of a newly built community center in the heart of his old neighborhood, a smile of pride on his face. The area, once full of struggles and despair, was now flourishing, thanks in part to Aidan's determination to give back. After years of hard work and dedication to his studies, Aidan had become a successful entrepreneur, but he never forgot the roots from which he came. As he walked through the streets, now lined with new buildings, businesses, and clean sidewalks, Aidan was greeted by familiar faces. Neighbors who had once watched him struggle, but now saw him as a beacon of hope. The scholarships he had established for underprivileged children had allowed many young people to attend school and follow their dreams, just as he had been given the chance to do. Aidan had not only transformed his life, but had become the catalyst for change in his community. The sense of unity and pride that had once been lacking was now vibrant. People helped one another. Neighbors were more connected than ever, and there was an overwhelming sense of possibility in the air. On this particular day, Aidan made his way to the home of the man who had changed his life all those years ago, Mr. Mitchell. Now, in his late years, Mr. Mitchell sat in a cozy chair by the window, a sense of contentment on his face as he watched the world outside. When Aidan entered the room, Mr. Mitchell's eyes lit up. The years had passed, but the connection between them remained strong. Aidan walked over, knelt beside him, and took his hand. "Thank you, Mr. Mitchell, for everything," Aidan said, his voice thick with emotion. "You gave me a chance when no one else would." Mr. Mitchell looked up at him with a knowing smile. "You earned it, son. You've done more than anyone could have hoped. The world needs more people like you." Aidan nodded, his heart full. "And I'll make sure to pass it on." As he left Mr. Mitchell's house that day, Aidan knew his journey had come full circle. The child who had once saved a life now had the power to change many others, and he would continue to do so, ensuring the legacy of kindness and generosity would live on for generations to come.